My name is Anna, and I will never forget the sound of my jaw breaking. It was not just pain. It was betrayal turned into bone-shattering noise. I was standing in the kitchen when my sister Emily leaned against the counter with that smug little smile that had followed me my entire life. She did not touch me herself. She never did. She liked to give orders instead. That night, her voice was cold sharp, almost casual. "Show her place." Those 3 words hung in the air heavier than the belt our stepdad Frank had looped around his wrist. Before I could even process what she meant, Frank grabbed me by the collar and shoved me back against the table. His fist came fast, faster than I could move, and the explosion of agony that followed told me something inside my face had cracked for real. The room tilted, my ears rang, blood filled my mouth so quickly I could not swallow. Emily laughed, not a nervous laugh, but the delighted sound of someone who finally got exactly what she wanted. "That is what you get for stealing attention," she said, like she was scolding a child. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my face. The taste of iron mixed with the smell of fried onions still on the stove. My mother rushed in, but not to help me. She touched Emily's wrist gently and said, "Do not worry, sweetheart. Do not let her drama ruin your focus." She has always been too sensitive. I tried to speak, but every word hurt. My jaw throbbed, my teeth felt loose, and all I could hear was Frank breathing heavily above me like he had just done some necessary job. I wanted to scream, but instead I swallowed blood and silence. That was the rule in our house: silence or punishment. Emily crouched down close enough that I could see the shimmer of lip gloss she had stolen from my drawer. "You should have stayed invisible," she whispered. "Now you will remember where you belong." That was the moment I realized I was not just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the designated punching bag. My own sister had graduated from insults to commands, and Frank was her weapon of choice. The pain was sharp, yes, but what cut deeper was the clarity. They did not want me to speak. They wanted me erased. Later that night, while my jaw swelled and my vision blurred, we sat at the dinner table like nothing had happened. My plate of reheated pasta sat untouched. My mother praised Emily for her upcoming scholarship interview. Frank chewed in silence the hand that had struck me now calmly cutting meat. Emily glowed under the praise every word meant for her, every glance confirming she was the star. And me, sitting there with ice pressed to my face, I was the shadow they pretended not to see. When I tried to say it hurts, my mother sighed and said, "Stop being dramatic, Anna. We cannot afford any distractions this week. The world does not revolve around you." My father had died years earlier, and sometimes I wondered what he would have said if he had seen this. Maybe nothing. Maybe silence runs in this family like blood. I excused myself from the table, every step a reminder of cracked bone. I stared at the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. Her lips swollen, her eye red, her jaw crooked. For a moment, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Maybe silence was all I had left, but something shifted when I touched the bruise and felt the sharp edge of bone beneath the skin. This was not clumsiness. This was not an accident. This was chosen. Emily had chosen it. Frank had carried it out. My mother had excused it. And I was the one paying the price. I lay in bed that night listening to the house creak. Emily laughed down the hall while Frank's heavy steps moved between rooms. I closed my eyes, but the pain pulsed through me. I pressed my pillow to my face to muffle the sound of my sobs. No one knocked. No one cared. That is when the thought came quietly, almost like a whisper from inside me. They think you will stay silent. They think you will disappear like always. But maybe silence is exactly what they should fear. I was not always the girl with a broken jaw. For most of my life, I was simply the girl who faded into the wallpaper. My name was Anna, and I grew up in a house where invisibility was considered a virtue. My mother liked to say Emily was her sunshine. Emily glowed in every room she entered. Teachers adored her. Neighbors praised her. Boys carried her books. My mother would beam and say she always knew Emily was destined for something great. Then her eyes would slide past me as if she had forgotten I was in the room at all. When I was 12, Frank entered our lives. He was supposed to be a new start for my mother after my father died. At first, he played the role of steady provider. He smiled at church, shook hands with neighbors, and pretended to be the kind of man who saved a family. But behind closed doors, his temper showed itself in small ways. A slammed cupboard when dinner was not hot enough, a rough hand on my shoulder when I forgot to put away the dishes, always directed at me, never at Emily. Emily would giggle and say, "Daddy Frank is strict but fair," except he was not strict with her at all. He let her skip chores. He slipped her money for clothes. He looked at her too long sometimes, and I noticed even when no one else seemed to. I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. Still, I could not ignore how my mother seemed determined not to see. There were nights when Emily sat too close to Frank on the couch while we watched television. He would drape his arm along the back cushion and his fingers would graze her shoulder. My stomach turned, but when I mentioned it once to my mother, she snapped, "Do not invent stories, Anna. You are jealous of your sister, and that is ugly." After that, I stopped mentioning things. Silence became safer than being accused of lying. Growing up like that taught me how to disappear politely. At birthdays, I smiled when they gave me hand-me-down presents wrapped like new. At Christmas, I hid behind the tree when Emily twirled in the center of the living room showing off her gifts. At school, I was the quiet one. Teachers wrote notes like "quiet but capable" on my report cards. Friends were rare because Emily's orbit swallowed everyone around me. If a boy tried to talk to me, Emily would swoop in and somehow the conversation ended with her laughing and me standing alone. My mother never asked how my day went. She asked how Emily's rehearsal had gone, how Emily's grades were, how Emily's dress fit. Frank only spoke to me when I did something wrong. Emily, on the other hand, was his little queen. It was subtle at first, the favoritism, the way he bought her a new phone while mine was cracked and barely working, the way he defended her if she came home late while I was grounded for arriving 5 minutes past curfew. Later, it became bolder. I remember one evening at 14 when Emily returned from a party with glitter still in her hair. Frank poured her a glass of wine and told her she deserved to celebrate. I stared in shock. My mother cleared her throat but said nothing. I realized then that rules were only meant for me. Emily was untouchable. The more invisible I became, the stronger their bond grew. Sometimes I heard laughter through Emily's bedroom door when Frank checked in on her at night. I pressed my ear to the wall, but never caught words, only the low rumble of his voice and her high-pitched giggle. I hated myself for listening, yet I could not help it. Something about it felt wrong. Still, I stayed quiet. Always quiet. That was my role. To be the blur in the background. At school, assemblies, Emily was praised for everything from debate team to community service. Once, she even thanked me on stage for being supportive and for photobombing half her high school career. The audience laughed. Teachers laughed. Even the principal chuckled. My legs had gone cold in that chair. I did not move. Later that night at dinner, my mother repeated the joke and called it classic. I blinked and said I did not think it was funny. Emily rolled her eyes and said, "Do not be dramatic." My mother told me I was too sensitive. My father's absence echoed louder in those moments than in any graveyard. He had been gone for years, taken by illness, but I still wondered if his presence would have kept me from becoming the ghost of the family. Frank made sure I knew my place with small humiliations. He criticized the way I walked, the way I chewed, the way I breathed. He never touched Emily with anger. For me, his hand was always ready. A shove here, a slap there, a yank of my hair if I looked at him the wrong way. I learned to avoid eye contact. I learned to shrink. But every time his hand rested too long on Emily's shoulder, or every time he whispered something that made her smirk, I felt a different kind of fear. Not fear for me. Fear of what was festering in that house. Years later, when my jaw broke under his fist, the memory of those small moments rushed back like proof I should have trusted my instincts. The favoritism was never just favoritism. It was something darker, something my silence had allowed to grow. By the time I was 16, the difference between how Emily was treated and how I was treated was no longer something I could explain away as simple favoritism. It had hardened into a pattern, an ugly rhythm that left me gasping for air while she thrived under their protection. If I earned an A on a test, my mother barely nodded. If Emily received a B, Frank told her she was brilliant and bought her ice cream to celebrate. When I joined the school writing contest and won second place, Emily mocked my story until Frank barked at me to stop embarrassing the family with silly dreams. That night, he ripped my notebook in half, and Emily smirked as if she had won something precious. It did not stop there. At family gatherings, Emily paraded her accomplishments while I was introduced as the younger sister who helps with chores. Once, an uncle asked me what I enjoyed doing, and before I could answer, Emily chirped that I liked hiding in my room. Everyone laughed, and I smiled like it was a harmless joke, though my stomach burned. My silence became their entertainment. The more I tried to claim even a small piece of space, the harsher Frank became. He seemed to enjoy being Emily's enforcer. She did not have to lift a finger. If she complained that I borrowed her sweater, Frank would storm into my room and yank it off my body. If she accused me of being rude, he would slap me across the face without hesitation. My mother always looked away. She stirred pots on the stove, she folded laundry. She sighed that we should all just get along. But her refusal to act was its own cruelty. The message was clear. Emily mattered. I did not. The worst part was how predictable it became. I could feel it coming like the weather changing. The tension in the house always built when Emily felt threatened. When I joined a photography club and one of my pictures was displayed in the library, she noticed how a boy complimented me. That night, Frank dragged me into the garage and shouted about how I was distracting Emily from her studies. His hand slammed against the wall inches from my head. I bit my tongue and swallowed my words because speaking would only make it worse. Later, Emily strolled in humming her perfume filling the air. She patted Frank's shoulder as if he had done her a favor. The way he looked at her made me nauseous. I wanted to scream at both of them, but instead, I walked away, clutching my camera bag like a shield. Another time near the end of junior year, a classmate named Josh asked if I wanted to study together. The next morning, Emily cornered me in the kitchen. "Stay away from him," she hissed. Before I could answer, Frank appeared looming behind her. He said boys were not interested in quiet little ghosts like me, and if I kept distracting Emily, he would make sure I regretted it. Hours later, I found my locker vandalized with cruel words written in permanent marker. I never proved it, but I knew Emily had arranged it. Each act chipped away at me, but the cruelest moment arrived the night Emily accused me of trying to steal attention from her at a school talent show. She had performed a dramatic monologue that earned a standing ovation. I had simply taken photos for the yearbook. Yet when the spotlight briefly caught me at the edge of the stage, she stormed home furious. Frank met me at the door. His eyes were cold. He gripped my arm so tightly I thought the bone might snap. "You think you can shine," he growled. He slammed me against the hallway wall. My head rang with the impact. Emily watched from the staircase, her lips curved in satisfaction. My mother's voice floated from the kitchen telling us to keep the noise down. No one came to stop him. That was the night I realized Frank was no longer just a stepfather keeping discipline. He had become Emily's weapon, her personal executioner, and he relished the role. The escalation peaked a week later when Josh, still kind, despite my attempts to avoid him, left a flower in my locker. Emily saw it. Her eyes narrowed. That evening, she whispered something into Frank's ear while they stood too close in the living room. He nodded once like a soldier receiving orders. When I walked in, he turned to me, his jaw tight, his fists already clenched. Emily stepped aside with a smile, and the last thing I remember clearly before the pain took over was her voice saying, "Show her place." His punch connected with my jaw, and the world fractured into blood and bone. I fell to the ground, gasping, my mind flickering between agony and clarity. I understood then that the violence was not random, it was orchestrated. Emily gave the commands, Frank delivered the blows, my mother provided the silence. It was a system designed to erase me, and in that moment, broken on the floor, I felt not just pain, but the weight of years of escalation crashing down. They had crossed a line that night, one they believed would keep me silent forever. They could not have known that the sound of my jaw breaking would also be the sound of something inside me waking up. Lying in bed with my jaw throbbing and my body aching, I thought maybe someone would finally care. I thought maybe my mother would knock on the door with ice packs or soup, that Emily would feel even a flicker of guilt, that Frank might at least pretend it was an accident. Instead, silence filled the hallway like cement. The next morning, my mother stood in the kitchen with her coffee and said, "Anna, do not start any drama today. Emily has her scholarship interview and she cannot be distracted." I opened my mouth to protest, but the pain shot through my jaw and only a muffled sound escaped. Emily rolled her eyes and said she fell down the stairs last night. You know how clumsy she is. Frank chuckled and added, "She has always been a little careless." My mother nodded as if that explained everything. My chest tightened. They had agreed on the story without even asking me. It was decided. My truth did not matter. That night at dinner, when I tried to speak about the pain, Frank's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Do not exaggerate. You tripped, end of story." Emily leaned forward, her nails tapping the table. "If you say otherwise, I will tell everyone you made advances on Frank." My fork clattered against the plate. My eyes widened, but she only smiled, daring me to challenge her. My mother sighed dramatically and said, "Anna, you need to stop creating problems. Families stick together. Do you want to ruin us?" The words felt heavier than the bruise on my face. They had built a wall of lies and placed me inside it. I was the unreliable one, the sensitive one, the problem. The gaslighting became relentless. When a neighbor asked about the swelling, Emily laughed and said Anna is so dramatic she tripped over her own shoes. My mother joined in telling the neighbor I was always a dreamer who liked attention. Frank just smirked. Every denial pressed me further into silence. I began to wonder if maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I had tripped. Maybe the fist I remembered was just fear twisting reality. That is how gaslighting works. It gnaws at your certainty until you cannot trust your own bones. Still, I kept notes in a hidden journal. Times, dates, words spoken. I wrote because I needed some record that I was not crazy. Every time Emily accused me of jealousy, every time Frank claimed he was only correcting me, every time my mother insisted I was ruining family peace, I wrote it down. Proof for myself that I was not inventing this nightmare. One afternoon, I overheard Emily in the living room telling Frank she worried I might tell someone. His response was cold. "She will not. No one believes her." The casual confidence in his tone made my stomach twist. They counted on my silence like it was currency. Later, Emily cornered me in the hallway. "If you talk," she whispered, "I will destroy you. You think anyone would believe you over me." She leaned closer, her breath warm and sour. "I will tell everyone you wanted him." The bile rose in my throat. It was not just cruelty. It was calculated. She was ready to turn her sin into my shame. I stumbled into my room shaking. My mother knocked once, not to comfort me, but to deliver another warning. "Do not upset Emily before her big week. She has worked too hard for you to mess this up." I wanted to scream, "Do you not see what is happening?" But the words locked in my throat. The gaslighting had become a cage. Nights were the worst. I could hear Frank's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes they stopped at Emily's room. A giggle followed, a door closing softly. My chest would tighten until I pressed the pillow over my ears. I was drowning in silence that was not mine. The day after the scholarship interview, Emily paraded through the house glowing with triumph. My mother kissed her cheek and said she was proud. Frank poured her a glass of wine. I sat at the table with ice pressed to my jaw and whispered, "It still hurts." Emily smirked and said, "Stop lying, Anna. You love playing victim." My mother's eyes hardened. "If you cannot support your sister, then keep your mouth shut." That moment sealed it. They did not just want me quiet. They wanted me erased. The gaslighting was complete. My voice had no weight, my pain no proof, my existence no value. I walked upstairs and stared into the mirror again. The swollen face staring back looked foreign, but the eyes burned with something sharp. They thought I would accept the cage. They thought I would let their lies become my truth. But beneath the bruises, something stubborn whispered, "Write it down. Remember, do not let them decide who you are." That night, I filled 3 pages with every detail I could recall, every threat, every denial, every whispered insult. My hand shook, but my words steadied me. For the first time in years, I believed myself more than I believed them. The week after the interview, I walked through the house with my jaw still aching and my mind spinning with questions I was not allowed to ask. Silence pressed down like a weight on my chest, but silence also sharpened my eyes. I started to notice things that had always been there, but I had pushed aside. The way Emily lingered too close to Frank when she passed him in the hallway, the way his eyes followed her with a flicker that was not paternal, the way my mother suddenly busied herself with dishes whenever they sat together on the couch. My instincts screamed, but my voice stayed locked. One evening, while Frank and my mother were out at a fundraiser and Emily was at rehearsal, I wandered into the garage. I had always avoided that space because it smelled of oil and fear. Memories of being cornered there after school, but that night I noticed the small security camera mounted near the ceiling. My hands trembled as I searched the cluttered workbench for the DVR box. When I found it tucked beneath a pile of rags, my pulse pounded. The files were stored on a removable drive. I slipped it into my pocket and hurried upstairs before anyone returned. Later in my room, I connected it to my laptop. The screen flickered and there it was, grainy footage from the garage. My stomach clenched as I saw myself shoved against the wall by Frank, my face contorted in pain, my jaw breaking under his fist. Proof! I replayed it twice, each time my throat tightening, because finally I had evidence. But then I clicked the next file and what I saw made my skin crawl. It was Emily and Frank alone in the garage. She leaned against the car, her head tilted, her lips curved. Frank stepped closer, his hand brushing her hair. She laughed softly and then he kissed her. Not a fatherly kiss, not even a hesitant one, but hungry, deliberate. My breath caught. I wanted to believe I was hallucinating, but the image was clear. Emily wrapped her arms around his neck like she had done it before. The sound of my own heartbeat roared in my ears. I slammed the laptop shut and stumbled back. I whispered no over and over, but the evidence sat heavy in the machine. The bruises on my jaw were not the darkest part of our house. The darkness was this secret affair growing under our mother's nose, protected by her silence, fueled by Emily's jealousy, and Frank's corruption. I could not erase what I had seen. My hands shook as I opened the laptop again and forced myself to watch to be certain. Every frame screamed betrayal. Emily had turned my stepfather into her weapon, not only because he enjoyed power, but because she had entwined herself with him in ways I could barely comprehend. It explained everything. Why he never punished her, why he always defended her, why he hit me so hard when she demanded it. She was not just the golden child, she was his accomplice and his lover. I gagged and ran to the bathroom, retching until my throat burned. When I looked up at the mirror, my face was pale, my eyes wild, but beneath the horror a spark flickered. They thought they owned the narrative. They thought they could call me clumsy and dramatic and jealous. But the camera had captured the truth. It was no longer just my word against theirs. It was images and sound, undeniable and damning. I needed someone to tell someone outside the walls of this house. My mind went to Sarah, a friend I had drifted from when Emily made sure no one stayed close to me. I texted her a simple message. "Can we meet?" She agreed. The next day, we sat in a corner booth of a quiet diner. She gasped when she saw my bruised face up close. "What happened, Anna?" My voice shook as I said, "I have proof." I slid the laptop across and pressed play. She covered her mouth when she saw Frank hit me. When the second clip appeared, she whispered, "Oh my God," and shut it quickly, eyes wide with disgust. She looked at me fiercely. "You cannot stay silent. This is not just abuse. This is corruption. You have to show someone." I whispered, "They will destroy me if I speak." She reached across the table and gripped my hand. "They already are. But if you expose this, they cannot hide anymore." Her words carved into me like light through fog. That night, I hid the drive in the lining of my backpack and wrote everything down. Every threat, every slap, every twisted laugh. For the first time, I felt less like a ghost and more like a witness building a case. My jaw still hurt, my body still shook, but inside I carried something stronger than fear. I carried the truth. They thought the camera would protect them, maybe even intimidate me into silence, but it had become my weapon, and with it, I would finally turn their lies against them. The night of Emily's big celebration came like a storm gathering over the house. My mother had organized a dinner at a local banquet hall to honor Emily's scholarship award, a moment that was supposed to cement her as the perfect daughter and crown jewel of the family. I watched as the guests arrived in glittering dresses and pressed suits, neighbors and family friends who had always believed the glowing stories Emily told about herself. My jaw was still tender when I smiled, but beneath the ache a fire burned steady. The flash drive rested in my pocket like a heartbeat. Sarah sat in the back row as my quiet anchor. When the lights dimmed and Emily stepped onto the small stage in her blue satin dress, applause thundered through the hall. She smiled wide, basking in the glow of admiration, Frank standing beside her like a proud guardian, my mother dabbing her eyes as if this was the happiest night of her life. Emily tapped the microphone and began to speak about dreams and hard work, about how she had overcome challenges with the support of her family. Each word felt like acid dripping into my ears. She paused dramatically, thanking Frank for his guidance and calling my mother her rock. I felt the room sway with admiration. Then her eyes flicked toward me, a flash of triumph curling her lips. It was the moment she believed she had won. That was when I stood up. Chairs creaked as people turned. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my voice rang clear. I said, "I need to show everyone the truth." My mother hissed, "Sit down, Anna, do not ruin this." Frank's jaw tightened. Emily's smile faltered. I walked to the stage, each step carrying years of bruises and silence. I plugged the drive into the projector before anyone could stop me. The screen lit up. At first, the crowd murmured confused. Then the image appeared. Grainy, but unmistakable. Frank's fist colliding with my face, my body crumpling to the garage floor. Gasps sliced the air. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" My mother clutched her chest. Emily stammered, "She is lying, it is edited." But then the second clip rolled. Frank and Emily in the garage, her laughter soft, his hand on her hair, the kiss that shattered every mask they wore. The hall erupted. Neighbors covered their children's eyes. Old friends shook their heads in disbelief. Whispers turned into shouts. I stood frozen, my heart racing but my voice steady. This is the family they told you to admire. This is what they did to me. Frank's face drained of color. Emily's perfect mask cracked into rage. My mother collapsed into her chair, whispering, "No, no, no." A family friend stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Is this true?" Emily screamed, "She is jealous. She has always been jealous." Frank tried to bluster, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that the footage was taken out of context, but the images played again, undeniable, searing into the eyes of every witness. Sarah stood and said, "I saw the bruises myself. She is not lying." The authority in her voice cut through the chaos. A neighbor pulled out his phone and began dialing. The police. Another whispered about calling the school. Emily's scholarship committee would hear of this. My mother finally looked at me, not with love, but with fear. "Anna, what have you done?" she whispered. I answered, simply told the truth. The banquet hall dissolved into chaos. Some guests stormed out, others confronted my family, directly, voices rising. Frank lunged as if to rip the drive from the projector, but two fathers in the crowd restrained him. Emily sobbed not out of shame, but out of fury that her kingdom was collapsing. My mother kept muttering about reputation, about how people would never look at her the same again. And she was right. In that single night, their fortress of lies crumbled into dust. The weight that had smothered me for years began to lift as I watched people finally see. They saw the violence, the betrayal, the corruption. They saw me not as a clumsy girl desperate for attention, but as a survivor bearing proof. The banquet that was supposed to immortalize Emily as a star turned into a trial where truth was the judge. When the police arrived, Frank tried to laugh it off, but the officer's eyes hardened at the footage. They placed cuffs around his wrists as the crowd fell silent. Emily shrieked, lunging toward him, but another officer held her back. The whispers about statutory crimes rippled like fire through dry grass. My mother begged the officers to keep it private, but they shook their heads. "This is evidence of multiple offenses. It cannot be buried." As Frank was led away, Emily's sobs turned into screams of hatred. "You ruined me," she spat at me. I met her eyes and said, "You did that yourself." The room buzzed with the raw shock of revelation. Some faces turned toward me with pity, others with admiration, all of them finally knowing. I walked off the stage, my legs trembling, but my spirit steady. For the first time, I was not the shadow. I was the one holding the light. The exposure was not just about proving what happened to me. It was about showing the community the rot that had festered behind closed doors. And now it was no longer hidden. It was out in the open where it could not be denied. The days after the banquet felt like stepping out of a cave into sunlight that was blinding and merciless. The story spread through town faster than gossip had ever moved before. What people had once whispered about my clumsiness or my supposed jealousy was replaced with shocked conversations about the footage. At the grocery store, heads turned not in contempt for me anymore, but in disbelief at Frank and Emily. The police charged Frank with assault and statutory offenses. The footage was more than enough. When the officers questioned me again, I sat straighter than I ever had and repeated the truth without shaking. For years, I had been silenced, but now the system finally heard me. Frank sat in county jail awaiting trial, his arrogance stripped. Emily was suspended from school pending investigation. Her scholarship committee withdrew their offer within 48 hours of the footage going public. The girl who had strutted across the banquet stage now hid at home blinds, drawn screaming at reporters who gathered at the gate. My mother tried to control the narrative, insisting the video was manipulated, but no one listened. Friends she had cherished stopped calling. Church members avoided her pew. She carried herself like a ghost draped in pride that no longer fooled anyone. I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief watching her crumble. Part of me still wished she had protected me, but the larger part knew she had chosen denial until the world forced her to see. When court hearings began, the judge allowed the video to be admitted as evidence. I sat in the witness box, the same clips playing on a large screen. Frank avoided my eyes, his face gray. Emily sat behind the defense table, trembling with rage, whispering furiously to her attorney. The room was silent, except for the playback of my jaw shattering and the sound of their kiss. Gasps echoed once again. The judge's gavel cut through the air. The weight of the law was finally against them, not me. The verdict came swift. Frank was convicted on multiple counts. Sentencing would determine years behind bars. Emily, though technically legally consenting by age, was branded complicit in exploitation and obstruction. She faced expulsion from her school and public disgrace that would follow her into every corner of adulthood. Watching them collapse under the pressure of consequences was not a moment of glee, but of grim justice. I had imagined revenge 1,000 times, but reality was heavier and sadder. Still, it was right. The community that had once ignored me began to treat me with unexpected kindness. Neighbors brought casseroles, old teachers called to say they believed me now, even relatives who had sided with Emily apologized. Some apologies were clumsy, but I accepted them for what they were. I no longer needed their validation. I had proof, I had voice, I had freedom. My mother remained the most difficult to face. She cornered me one evening outside the courthouse, her eyes bloodshot. "You destroyed this family," she said. I answered quietly, "No, Mom, I saved myself." She shook her head as if she could not bear the mirror I held up. She chose to move away shortly after, unable to live in the same town where her reputation had collapsed. I did not stop her. The house that had once been my prison now belonged to me. With legal aid and community support, I secured my independence. At night, I walked through the quiet rooms and felt the absence of Frank's footsteps, the absence of Emily's smirk, the absence of my mother's cold silence. The walls no longer whispered threats. They exhaled peace. But peace was not passive. It was built on scars. My jaw would never feel the same. a faint stiffness when I yawned, a reminder etched into bone. I carried it not as a curse, but as a badge. It reminded me that silence had nearly destroyed me and truth had rebuilt me. Emily attempted to smear me online, posting rants about jealousy and betrayal, but no one believed her. The footage was permanent. Every time she tried to paint herself as the victim, someone reposted the clip and the conversation ended. She became a pariah in the same circles that once adored her. Justice did not erase the years of pain, but it shifted the balance. For once, the burden was not on my shoulders alone. It was on theirs, where it belonged. And as I watched them face consequence after consequence, I knew the story had turned. They were no longer the controllers of my fate. They were captives of their own lies, their reputations shattered just like my jaw had been. Except, my jaw healed and their lies would never mend. The final stage of my story was not written in courtrooms or banquet halls, but in the quiet choices I made after the storm had passed. When Frank was sentenced to prison and Emily vanished into the shadows of disgrace, I felt the urge to collapse under exhaustion, but instead, I chose to rise. I rented a small apartment of my own, modest but filled with light streaming through wide windows, a light I had never allowed myself to believe I deserved. At night, I brewed tea and listened to the city hum instead of the oppressive silence of my childhood home. I signed up for counseling not just to process trauma, but to learn how to trust myself again. For years, I had doubted my own memories because they told me I was dramatic, clumsy, jealous. Now, each session peeled away those lies and replaced them with truth. I was resilient, I was perceptive, I was brave. Healing was not linear. There were mornings when I still woke with my heart racing, nights when nightmares replayed the fist against my jaw. But instead of hiding from them, I spoke them aloud. Sarah remained by my side, her loyalty, a reminder that not everyone turned away. She was the first to call me not broken, but brave. We laughed in my kitchen as we cooked meals, and for the first time, I felt normalcy that was not laced with fear. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I encountered a neighbor who had once believed Emily's lies. She approached timidly and said, "I am sorry I did not see what was happening." I looked at her and realized forgiveness was not about erasing the past, but about releasing its grip. I told her thank you for saying that, and I meant it. I no longer needed validation, but I welcomed sincerity. The community organized a small fundraiser to support survivors of domestic violence, and they asked me to speak. Standing on that stage, microphone in hand, I felt the same fear as I had at Emily's banquet. But this time, the story was mine to tell from the beginning. I spoke about bruises that had been hidden, about voices stolen, about how silence protects abusers more than victims. I watched tears stream down faces in the crowd, and I knew my pain had transformed into power. People approached afterward, thanking me for giving words to what they too had endured. That connection was deeper than any applause Emily had ever chased. My mother remained absent. I heard she had relocated to another state, clinging to her bitterness. For a long time, I wrestled with whether to reach out, but each time I remembered the way she had chosen denial even when the truth screamed in her face. Letting go of her was not cruelty, but liberation. I could not carry her shame anymore. Emily's fate trickled back to me through whispers. She had been expelled and was working odd jobs under assumed names, furious at the world. Frank was serving years behind bars, his arrogance eroded by concrete walls. Their downfall was public, but mine was private renewal. I enrolled in college classes chasing dreams I had once buried. I painted again, colors splashing across canvas, no longer afraid that someone would mock my work. My jaw ached sometimes, but when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a victim. I saw a woman who had survived the storm and built her own shelter. Empowerment did not come in a single triumphant shout, but in the quiet consistency of choosing myself every day. I walked past the old banquet hall one evening, its lights glowing for another family's celebration, and instead of feeling bitterness, I felt relief. Their story was theirs, mine was mine. The ghosts no longer haunted me. The past did not vanish, but it no longer defined me. My scars told a story that ended not with silence, but with survival. If anyone asked me what justice looked like, I would tell them it is not revenge. It is the moment when truth is louder than lies. It is the moment you stop apologizing for existing. It is the moment you reclaim your name from the mouths of those who twisted it. I closed my eyes on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights shimmering below, and breathed deeply. The air was cool, the night vast, my life finally my own. For years I had been told to stay quiet, to hide, to bend, but I had spoken. I had stood, and the world had listened. And in that truth, I found my freedom.